The first time I heard Rose call my father darling, my blood went cold. It wasn't a slip of the tongue or a joke. She said it with confidence, like she was testing the waters. What chilled me even more was the way my father responded, with a soft smile and no attempt to correct her. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She was just a maid. She wasn't family. She wasn't one of us. So why did it feel like she was taking over our home, piece by piece? At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe I was overreacting. But as the days passed, I realized I wasn't the only one who felt it. My mom, my siblings, even the neighbors, they all saw it too. Something was very wrong with Rose. When Rose first came to our house, she was perfect, too perfect. She was quiet, polite, and worked like a machine. Our floors sparkled, the air smelled like freshly baked bread, and my dad couldn't stop praising her cooking. She's a treasure, he told my mom one night as we sat at the dining table. Where did you find her? My mom just smiled. She was proud of herself for finding someone so efficient. From Nneka. She said Rose worked for her sister for 2 years. Never any complaints. Rose barely spoke unless she was spoken to. She kept her head down, always wearing her light blue uniform and a pair of simple slippers. But even then, something about her made me uneasy. I chalked it up to her silence. Or maybe it was the way her eyes lingered a second too long when she looked at me. I ignored it. We all did. For a while. The change was subtle at first, like a storm creeping up on a sunny day. One evening, I was in the living room trying to concentrate on my homework when I noticed a faint, uneven tapping sound coming from the kitchen. It was like a rhythmic pattern, almost like someone tapping their fingers against the counter. I glanced up, but no one was in sight. Rose was in the kitchen, but she was completely still, standing by the counter with her back to me. The tapping continued, louder now, yet her hands didn't move. My heart raced as I tried to figure out what was happening. Was it the pipes? I wasn't sure, but the sound felt deliberate, like a message hidden in the rhythm. Then, just as I thought to get up, Rose slowly turned, her face blank, eyes meeting mine. The tapping stopped, and everything felt eerily silent. Later that night, my mom asked Rose to clean up after dinner. Rose stood still, her back to us, her hands on the sink. "Rose," my mom repeated, her voice firm. I said, "Clean the table." Rose turned slowly, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "I've been working all day, madam. Why can't one of your children do it?" The room went silent. My dad looked up from his phone, his brows furrowed. My siblings and I exchanged nervous glances. "Excuse me?" my mom said, her voice rising. Rose didn't back down. She crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly. "I'm just saying, madam. It's not like I'm a slave." I thought my mom was going to explode, but before she could say anything, my dad intervened. "She's right," he said quietly. "She works hard. The kids can help sometimes." It felt like a slap. My mom's face fell, her anger replaced by shock. Rose walked out of the kitchen without another word, leaving my mom to clear the table herself. After that night, Rose stopped wearing her uniform. She started dressing like she was one of us. Jeans, fitted tops, even a little makeup. My mom tried to tell her to wear the uniform again, but Rose just smiled and said, "It's not comfortable, madam." It wasn't just her clothes. It was her attitude. She stopped asking for permission to do anything. She cooked what she wanted, watched TV in the living room, and even answered the door like she owned the place. One evening, I came home from school and found her sitting in my mom's favorite chair, drinking tea and scrolling through her phone. "Rose," I said, my voice trembling, "what are you doing?" She looked up at me and smiled, that same slow, knowing smile. "Relaxing. Is that a problem?" I didn't answer. I just backed away, my heart pounding. When I told my mom, she stormed into the living room, furious. But by the time she got there, Rose was gone. "She's testing me," my mom muttered. "I don't know what's gotten into that girl." My dad was the first to take Rose's side. He defended her at every turn, saying my mom was too harsh or that we should all be grateful for Rose's hard work. "She's like family," he said one night when my mom complained about Rose taking food without asking. "Family?" my mom snapped. "She's the maid, not your sister." My dad didn't argue. He just shook his head and went to bed, leaving my mom fuming. But it wasn't just my dad. My siblings and I started feeling different around Rose. It was hard to explain. It wasn't fear exactly, but it was close. I avoided her whenever I could. My younger brother refused to be alone in the same room with her. Even my older sister, who was usually bold, started tiptoeing around the house. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispers. At first, I thought it was the TV, but then I realized it was coming from the kitchen. I crept down the hallway, my bare feet silent on the cold tiles. The kitchen door was slightly open, and I peeked inside. Rose was standing by the sink, her back to me. She was whispering something, but I couldn't make out the words. Her hands were moving strangely, almost like she was drawing something in the air. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot. Then she stopped. She turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see her profile. Her lips curled into that same eerie smile. "You should be asleep," she said softly, without looking at me. I bolted back to my room and locked the door. The next day, my mom called my dad at work. She told him she wanted Rose gone. "This is my house," she said. "I won't be disrespected in my own home." But when my dad came home that evening, he wasn't alone. He brought Rose with him. "She's staying," he said firmly, "and if you can't respect her, maybe you should leave." My mom's face crumpled. She didn't say anything. She just went upstairs and locked herself in their bedroom. Desperate, my mom called our pastor the next day. He arrived in the afternoon, a soft-spoken man with a calm presence. He walked through the house, praying under his breath, but when he got to the kitchen, he stopped. "This house," he said quietly, "there is something not right here." But he didn't act immediately. He asked my mom to gather some of Rose's personal belongings, her shoes, clothes, a towel she used often. He wanted to pray over them. When he left, he promised to return with more help. He said the house needed stronger prayers. A few days later, the pastor returned with other clergy members. They came with incense, candles, and holy oils. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. My mom was nervous, but hopeful. They gathered in the living room. The pastor spoke loudly, invoking prayers, while the others moved around the house, sprinkling holy water and chanting in soft voices. When they reached Rose's usual spot by the sink, things took a strange turn. The lights flickered. A sharp chill filled the room, and that's when Rose appeared in the doorway, her eyes dark and wide. She didn't speak. She didn't move. But we all felt the weight of her presence. The pastor stepped forward. "You don't belong here," he said. His voice trembled. "Leave this family alone." For a brief moment, Rose smiled. It wasn't the sweet smile she often wore. This one was cold, calculated, and almost demonic. "You think you can drive me out?" she said, her voice low, almost a growl. "This house belongs to me now." Objects began to rattle. A chair flew across the room. The lights exploded, plunging us into darkness. It was chaos, but the pastor kept chanting louder and more forcefully. His words echoed in the house, his strength growing with each prayer. When it was over, the house was still. Rose collapsed on the floor, her body twitching. She lay there for a long time before she stood up, dazed, as if nothing had happened. The pastor asked her what she remembered. She shook her head and whispered, "Nothing. I don't know what happened." We had no answers, no closure. But one thing was clear. The power she had was not hers alone. We fired Rose the next day. My dad didn't argue. He barely spoke. After she left, the house felt lighter, like a dark cloud had lifted. But we weren't the same. My parents' marriage was never the same. And every now and then I wonder, what would have happened if the pastor hadn't come?